Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is November 15th, Tuesday, November 15th, 2016. That puts us one Tuesday away from that thing we had the other Tuesday where somehow they say they elected that other guy. Anyway, plenty of things to discuss today, as always. And, pardon me, still a fire hose of information and apparently firing directly down my throat here. But we'll try and sample from as many of these story streams as possible. What a rich vein there is to mine. Here's something just sort of, I don't know, I guess you would say hot off the presses in that, there's no press and it's not any hotter than anything else, but I just saw it on Twitter. So that means for me, it's brand new. A raw story piece, just, give you a morning sampling of the what's been going on with the basket of deplorables. They're still active. I don't know why, but they are. Sarah Burris reporting for Raw Story. You remember the not that raw story of the mom who went hiking through the woods with her baby in her backpack carrier and ran into Hillary Clinton the day after the election, or 2 days after the election, whatever it was. They were hiking in the woods. And they ran into one another, and Hillary was walking her dog, and they took that nice photo, and it went viral because it was just sort of interesting. What is Hillary Clinton up to these days? This next day. Just to sort of prove the deplorables point, the mom who took a photo with Hillary Clinton while hiking is now getting death threats from Trump supporters. She must die because she walked through the woods at the same time as Hillary Clinton and took a picture. And, is there actually an explanation? I guess it doesn't really matter. You're a horrible, horrible person for doing this. Death threats for any reason probably puts you right in the basket of deplorables. But just so you get the full flavor of the story, we know about, of course, all the many cases of assault and bullying and vandalism and racist graffiti that are going on, as Sarah puts it here, as so many that Raw Story can barely keep up. And they've been a pretty good repository of those kinds of stories. The latest victim, though, is the mom who was walking through the woods with her baby when she ran into Bill and Hillary Clinton. I guess Bill took the picture. I was wondering who took the picture. Margot Gerster is her name, but I guess I shouldn't give that out anymore, but it's too late. She posted a snap of her chance meeting with the Clintons, posted it to Facebook. That was all it took for the alt-right, which is, of course, the new code word for horrible, disgusting, racist people. And you've heard my opinion of what they actually are. That the chief motivator is to be terrible to other people. I think it's actually just part of the playbook strategy to the extent that they've got one. They want to just cow everyone into silence by being so outrageously horrible that they are either are struck dumb by fear, or you're just like, I don't need this aggravation. So you stop talking to them so they can continue to go on and spread their crap. Anyway, so they're attacking her. Why? On what premise? Basically, it is this. The threats likely came from the rumor that Gerster staged the whole thing as a part of the Clintons' attempt to build their image after the election loss, as though that were going to matter for anything. So she's a crisis actor, and the whole thing was staged, and there can't be a genuine meeting of people in the walking dogs in the woods or something. I guess maybe because there aren't enough Secret Service agents in the picture or something. That's basically where we now stand. Everything has to be, and even if it was, what would you want to kill her for? It's done. It's done. But that's what the alt-right does. That's basically what motivates them. And the senior advisor to the incoming president is their God King. So this should be a great 4 years. We'll be, of course, discussing that and the many implications of it. I think we'll eventually get around to the bizarre story now being denied at some levels, that Donald Trump wants his kids to have top secret security clearance for some reason. We're not really sure why. He wants to make them unpaid national security advisors so that they can get this top secret clearance. I know he depends on Ivanka a lot for a lot of bouncing ideas off of her, and maybe he thinks, I don't want to get in trouble if I accidentally share classified information with them, which is a valid worry, but control yourself. You damn it, dummy. What's wrong with you? Anyway, so that's where we stand with the kids. Meanwhile, unpaid national security advisor, the person who Donald Trump trusts more than anyone else, was apparently also, I don't know whether at the same sit-down, was part of the same 60 Minutes interview, or whether they did a separate one with the family or just one with Ivanka. But the person on whom the incoming president depends so heavily that she needs to get a national security clearance used the opportunity, apparently, to sell her line of jewelry on TV. So that's good. And also, I guess, good for the journalists at 60 Minutes who get somebody so important to the incoming administration on camera, and what do they get out of her is, I sell jewelry. Oh, really? That's great. What a great interview. Okay, well, we'll review. We'll see how that develops. The Trump people now, I think, denying it for some reason, which would be fine if they backpedaled from that. That's an extraordinarily stupid thing to do, but I guess it goes along with their, the Secret Service code names for Don Jr. and Eric. Going by Uday and Kusei, I suppose there was really nothing else that they could do. Why not give them security clearance as well? Okay, let's round up the other stories that are surely of more importance to everybody, except, of course, the woman who's getting death threats. That's the central story in her life. Greg Dworkin, joining us from Connecticut. Did you meet anybody in the woods today?
No.
All right, see?
Took my dog for a walk.
Oh, really? I don't think so.
Yeah, well, there's nobody there to see it, so you'll just have to take my word for it.
Without pictures,
I didn't post it on Facebook.
Yeah, that's right. And you planted the story in the Hawaii Advertiser as well.
I have never been a fan of Facebook, and I'm just starting to dislike it more and more and more every day.
Big story, though.
It is, and a couple of pieces here.
Oh, great.
First of all, I have this Ben Collins tweet that I saw this morning. It's about Denzel Washington backs Trump in the most epic way possible.
Yeah, I saw that yesterday.
While the rest of liberal Hollywood is still trying to demonize Donald Trump, Denzel Washington is speaking out in favor of the president-elect. The site is AmericanNews.com. Of course, no such site exists. It's a fake site if it does exist. This didn't happen. And Ben Collins' a tweet says, this Facebook trending story is 100% made up. Nothing in it is true, but it has 10,000 shares in the last 6 hours.
Yeah, and I don't even know what it's up to now. I saw that story, and I was hopeful that he was going to be chronicling this. He's from Daily Beast, is that right?
I think so.
I clicked on it just to see, is this somebody who might, chronicle this stuff and do a story? I should do I need a fake news
check mark, so
maybe. So he must be an important dude. But like Gunfail, I'll just take on one more fun project, chronicling the fake news. I can't do that one, but
no,
it needs to be done.
Too diffuse. And here is one.
They'll always be a step ahead of the chroniclers.
Yeah, from BuzzFeed. Hyperpartisan Facebook pages are publishing false and misleading information at an alarming rate.
Yes.
And I think we covered this a little bit in terms of the election itself and some of the crap that was out there that are, Hillary planning revolt if she loses and the gun grabbing and all that sort of stuff. But this particular analysis says 38% of all posts on these hyperpartisan right-wing Facebook pages were either a mixture of true and false or mostly false, compared to 19% of posts from 3 hyperpartisan left-wing pages. So apparently we do it better than they do in terms of the truth. This from Columbia Journalism Review. Facebook can no longer be I didn't do it boy of global media. Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg posted a picture of himself in quarter profile with his toddler Max as they watched Donald Trump become president of the United States. Again, I think we may have covered a little bit of this the other day. but it's just
More is good.
remarkable that it just continues and continues, and nobody seems to have tools to be able to deal with it. Now on Twitter, we occasionally get fooled by the parody account that isn't so clear that it's parody. Rudy Giuliani's a classic. Anything you see tweeted by Rudy, he's not on Twitter, so you know it's fake.
Ah.
A lot of people fall for that, but it's it's semi-amusing. This stuff isn't amusing.
No. And I understand the pushback from Facebook. That is a tall order to find a way, regardless of who is going to react to it. Because yesterday's story was that they had a plausible fix for attacking the fake news problem, or at least part of it, but they were afraid of right-wing pushback because they had found their own numbers were that this was really not exclusively, but overwhelmingly a problem among conservatives, and it would basically start cutting off their supply of their favorite food, and they would get upset and accuse Facebook of bias, and the numbers would tend to bear them out if it weren't also the case that they were weeding out fake news, and you guys just share more fake news. So I understand that it's a very difficult thing for them to approach. But
well, it's also it's part of the bigger problem of Twitter, for example, being founded by free speech libertarians who think that it's just anathema to try to police it, and so you wind up getting the Pepe the Frog co-opted by neo-Nazis.
Yeah.
And nobody can do anything about it because death threats, free speech. And if Facebook is going to take the position it's not our problem in promulgating fake news, then, just throw that on the pile of we're doomed.
Yeah, I mean, it's bad news, but I think they are
bad
ready
news,
to...
It's terrible news. It's not even real news.
Right, exactly. How do I even know it's real? But they are beginning to tackle it. I mean, it's too late for this thing, but... I wish they had been more proactive about it, but it would be awfully difficult, particularly at a peak season for their traffic and therefore revenue, to sort of unilaterally say, we need to impose this thing which is going to cause an enormous uproar now in the middle of this, only to be accused of doing it to favor Hillary Clinton. I wouldn't want to walk into that firestorm either, but then again, if I had created this platform, which on the one hand they tell advertisers, anybody who might possibly give them money for their platform or because of their platform, they can't say enough about how influential it is. When it's pointed out, it can be influential in all the wrong ways. Oh no, we don't really, people make up their own minds. They do, but based on what they see in your place. So to the extent that they really believe, and I don't doubt that Zuckerberg is troubled by this personally, to the extent that they believe they're making things better in the world, they're going to want to take a look at some fixes. And they had some in mind, and they shied away from them, and I guess we'll see them experimenting with them soon.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. So this is a piece from Brookings with a scrap of solace about the election. It says, for those of you who, like me, worry about Trump's dark quasi-authoritarian brand of populism and his apparent contempt for a constitutionally ordered government, the polls offer a hint of solace, or at least about the public, if not necessarily about the president-elect. Separating the voters from Trump. The election was a Hail Mary pass for change, not an ideologic statement or an endorsement of Trump's dark vision, and here's the case in the 6 propositions. 1, Trump's base didn't win it for him. Evidence, Republicans and non-college whites each made up only about a third of the electorate, and there's considerable overlap there. Trump won because independents broke late for him, and evidence for that is late deciding voters. That's where I blame Comey. Independents chose change over qualifications. That is, they understood Clinton's much better equipped to be president, but they cared more about change and decided Trump was an acceptable risk. And we know the evidence for that. We talked about that. Bring change was the single biggest thing that people said that they wanted. Change voters want better outcomes, and here's a little bit of solace there, because if Trump doesn't deliver, then they can turn on him, and hopefully they will. Voters thought the economy's condition is not good or poor by a margin of almost 2 to 1. The same is true for countries being on the wrong versus the right track. Although we talked about that the other day, that's a bad measure because now that Trump has won, it's still the same wrong versus right track. It's just that the parties have switched in terms of how they're describing it. The email scandal proved fatal to Clinton because it neutralized corruption and character issues that could have tipped the scales against Trump. With corruption off the table, voters were free to weigh change versus experience, and Trump won on that. That's an interesting point of view. And to me, of course, that's where I blame media, because this whole corruption and character issue was, 600 days straight of emails. And you know that by looking at the word clouds that people made about what media talked about and what people remembered about it. And, and then the media turned around and say, well, it wasn't us. It's not my fault. It was a big story. We had to cover it. It's her fault. Maybe. But not so much. And now, only now, after the election, are people discovering in the media that, gee, there's all these stories about Donald Trump and his conflicts of interest. Let's talk about it.
Weird. Yeah, I don't know. What can you do? Everybody had their own issues to focus on, and there was no shortage of them, and I'm sure that we spent too much time on one or another of them, but yeah. Well,
there it is. Anyway, so this goes on.
Thus,
this was not an ideological election. It was not an endorsement of Trump's dark vision. It was a Hail Mary pass for change, a call to shake things up. The implication is just as Trump implied in his victory speech, which he said we had to do a great job. He performs over its curtains, and soon. So that would be nice. It's interesting that Chris Arnott tweeted out that the counties that moved from Romney to Trump almost entirely overlap the counties where drug overdoses are way up.
Yeah. They went. Wait a minute. Counties where they moved from Romney to Trump? Is that what you said? Okay.
That way overperformed. That way overperformed how Romney did.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, I would be on drugs too, I guess, if I lived there.
Right, but they were on drugs before, so.
Yes, I might start.
So the change thing clearly mattered. And, okay, fine. So if people aren't adopting Trump's white nationalist agenda, they just happen to elect him despite it, that's certainly helpful in regard to deciding to resist it, because it's not as if you are trying to thwart the will of the voters, at least. At least there's that. So Nancy Pelosi certainly has made statements about Steve Bannon's approach to being a White House official.
Yes.
Whatever they call him, chief strategist. New York Times today and yesterday, basically front page about that. I have a screen capture of that.
All right.
And that's worth mentioning, not because having it on the New York Times stops everything, but what they pointed out is that there is actual resistance to Bannon's appointment, both from Republicans and Democrats. And at the same time, you mentioned Uday and Kisei. And we should not forget that especially Donald, but Eric to a lesser extent, certainly Donald Trump Jr., has just as close ties to the alt-right as Bannon does.
Certainly if you're going by how often he retweets
exactly.
their work, yeah.
A retweet is not an endorsement, except that I do it constantly.
Yeah, right. And many of the ones that caused the biggest freakouts caused them because they were retweeted, well, I guess in part because they were retweeted by Don Jr., and also, of course, the content. It was the six-pointed star thing that they tried to claim was a sheriff's star he was in on.
So if you're talking about clearance for the Trump family, or Bannon, that's a piece of it.
Yeah, right. So for both of them, Bannon, I think the more dangerous of the two. He was generally he was the guy behind the generation of this stuff, giving out. What you should do is give me a thing with a Jewish star in it. Donald Jr., I think, is just like, oh hey, and retweeting it without any thought, possibly without any thought for what the hell it means, or worse, with clear ideas about what exactly it means. And so giving a clearance to them to utilize classified and national security level information to generate deplorable memes, and then entrusting a guy who says, I didn't realize, if he's really that dumb, Don Jr., do you really want him also handling classified information? As other people pointed out almost immediately, they couldn't even keep themselves from tweeting pictures of their ballots, which is illegal in New York. And although sometimes I think
well, it's
that's kind
probably
of a
the
dumb
first
law,
time they ever voted, so they got excited about it.
Well, true. They weren't even registered when their dad was in the primary, so it is their first time. I understand that and all, and it's a dumb law, but again, they never check. They just do what they want to do, and Republicans who are experienced politicians have had this problem for years, since all the people who used to go and visit in Iraq. And tweet pictures of themselves. Patrick McHenry used to do that, and he kept tweeting out pictures of himself inside green zone compounds, which gives away, positional and situational intelligence on social media. The same thing is going to give these idiots clearance. They're going to do something dumb with it.
So we have that. We have, obviously, and this is going to be a continuing struggle to prevent these guys from being normalized. And then at the same time, we are starting to move toward the policy issues, and Obamacare is the one I think that comes up the most. And I think it's worthwhile noting that, as Paul Waldman notes, he's got a nice story about it here, how Republicans go about sort of repealing Obamacare will be 100% dictated by politics, not substance, which has, of course, been the case all along. And how much of it can be done is going to be difficult. It's interesting following this whole discussion because there's things that they want to do that they can't do. There's things that they're going to leave in place because they really have no choice. Philip Klein, who's a conservative that follows a lot of this stuff, points out that where you go with this is going to be quite difficult. They may decide to get rid of it, whatever that means, and it's not clear what that means, how much of it they keep, how much of it they jettison. But they have nothing to replace it. It's incredibly difficult to replace it. That's how come the Republicans haven't in 6 years come up with any kind of replacement. And they're going to be stuck on it.
Yeah.
They're going to have, that's one of those things that, as we talked about with the Brookings piece, they're going to have to deliver to the public. And it turns out some of the stuff that they want to keep are the stuff that makes it expensive, like no pre-existing conditions.
Mm-hmm.
So the basic problem with healthcare is that it's too expensive in general. And Obamacare isn't the reason why healthcare is expensive. If anything, it stabilized healthcare costs and obviously made healthcare more available to people. Now, you can cut that back, but if you keep the pre-existing conditions and, some of the other things that he says he's not going to get rid of, you could stay on up to 26 years of age and so on and so forth, then it doesn't get that much cheaper.
No.
If it doesn't get that much cheaper, then what is he delivering to his constituents that he promised would change everything?
I don't know. Have some Trump vodka.
So, Paul Waldman's view, what's going on here is the whole idea of repealing the ACA has been something of a scam. This should not shock you.
Oh, not shock me. Sorry. Okay. Yes.
For 6 years, Republicans have told their constituents that Obamacare is a freedom-crushing demon spit forth from the very fires of hell. And it became their primary vessel of symbolic rebellion against President Obama, the way they could show the folks back home they're sticking their middle finger at that usurper in the White House. That's why they took so many pointless repeal votes. Hey, don't forget, I still hate Obama, they were saying. Having gone down that road, they now have to follow through, or at least do something that makes it look like they're following through. The problem is that Obamacare, as this vague thing few people understand, is quite unpopular, but most of the things Obamacare actually does are quite popular. Undoing them in one fell swoop would be an absolutely catastrophic disruption of the American healthcare system. And undoing them at all will risk an enormous backlash. And that's what happens when you toss 20 million people off the coverage. So what do? Well, the answer is you say you're repealing the law, but you don't actually repeal it.
Oh, that's a good solution. I thought of that. That's why I like it.
Yeah. You repeal some parts, the unpopular ones, while trying to leave the stuff people like. Then you say, we repealed Obamacare, woohoo, and hope your constituents don't notice you actually didn't.
Yes, and if they do, then look, some of them will just say, see what a genius he is?
Mm-hmm.
He did it in a way that, there will be people who were fooled who will then find out that they were fooled and say, yeah, look what he did. He fooled the idiots. Well, you were one of them. No, I wasn't. I knew all along. Yeah. Right. And sometimes all it takes is a change in the name, which we discussed extensively with the in Kentucky and the Connect system. But that was a Democrat doing it. Here,
but he still got unelected,
Yeah.
And that's the frustrating part of it. And that's the part truly I don't understand. And we'll have to see how it plays in places like Connecticut and plays in places like California as well as like Kentucky to see how that works.
Yeah. All right.
Well, he gives an example. He says, Paul Waldman, they say they're keeping the ACA's ban on pre-existing condition denials, but that's not really true.
No.
First, we'll be going back to the days when you had to tell the insurance company every time you've been to the doctor for the past 5 or 10 years. Remember how much fun that made the application process? And then if you do have pre-existing conditions like tens of millions of Americans, you'll be shunted off to a high-risk pool, which is without doubt the absolute worst way to cover people with pre-existing conditions because it puts all the expensive patients in one pool, which means that high-risk pool coverage will almost inevitably mean coverage incredibly expensive and not as comprehensive as it ought to be. But Republicans have no choice to do that if they're going to eliminate the individual mandate, which is one of their top priorities, because with no mandate and a ban on pre-existing condition denials, you'd be able to wait until you got sick or injured to acquire insurance. And if people are free to do that, the market would collapse.
Yes.
That gives you a sense of how complicated repeal and replace is going to be.
If you try to actually do it.
If you try to actually do it.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So most of the Republicans don't really care about what repeal or replace looks like. They're going to pass something, call it a victory, but the details are what will have an enormous impact on all of our lives. And, of course, that's what we're going to have to track. It may not be as bad as it sounds simply because they can't do it. But at the same time, they could certainly screw it up and make it worse than it is. I have no doubt about that.
Okay, well, they're good at that, screwing things up. Well, yeah, okay. So, I mean, we just have to... I guess keep your eyes open for it. And I imagine that's pretty much how it'll go, and his supporters will say, whatever, and we'll say, but don't you see that it means something? That No, we don't see it. Did he lied to you, or that Obamacare was actually fine? You just didn't like Obama? What? No. I don't see it. So, I mean, it's a sorry state of affairs, but I think that's where we'll be. But yeah, all right.
So again, we're going to have to keep track of language and, how left means right and up means down and black means white and all that sort of stuff because we're going to hear it. See, we repealed everything. Well, you didn't really repeal any of it. Yeah, but we changed it. It's Trump care now. Well, if you left it exactly intact and called it Trump care, that is cool. You can have that. But, what did you actually do and how is that going to affect people? So, and that's just on the healthcare front. We have all the other fronts to follow as well.
Okay.
Including storm front. So, we'll look at them all and we'll keep doing that. And that's my quick roundup for this morning. This is Greg Dworkin speaking with my friend David Waldman, Kagro in the morning. Tough times ahead, but, we'll muddle through because what choice do we have, really?
I'll think on that for the next hour and a half.
Yeah, let me know.
Okay.
Take care, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Thank you. You do the same, and yeah, thanks for the roundup. I guess you got to hustle off to work today.
Sometimes you have to do that.
Occasionally. All right.
The funny thing is, of course, it's open enrollment now. And enrollment is spiking because people are worried that it's going to get taken away.
Yeah. And, well...
Too bad that doesn't affect people's vote. It'd be nice if it did.
People should look ahead. It was really difficult to foresee, though.
Right.
So...
Who could have known? Take care.
All right, thank you. You do the same. We'll talk again tomorrow, and let's head into the rest of these stories we need to round up. Let me grab this. Okay, a little bit of administrative work in the background here. So, to jump back for a moment to the Facebook story. Correctly pointed out, and this is true, Justice was saying in the background that Facebook originally had tools for dealing with the flow of fake news, although I guess it didn't prevent the posting or circulation of fake news. But they did at some point earlier in the year have a human curation team whose job it was to sort out the fake, or at least the useless, from the real and informational, with respect, I believe, to their front page type news feed. The Facebook generic news aggregating, whatever the hell they would call it there. Yeah, they did have people there who were in charge of curating the content, and they replaced them with a computer algorithm, which obviously did a much worse job. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of this problem, which was that by the end of the election cycle, Facebook, forget about getting news or seeing news that was shared by your friends on Facebook. The Facebook featured news stuff, the content that ended up there, frequently ended up prominently displaying front paging, if you will. In other words, it was basically serving it to everybody who logged onto Facebook and looked at the news, fake stories interspersed among the real stories. And I think they realized that pretty quickly, but their solution to it was to try to tweak the algorithm as opposed to saying, I don't know, what are we going to do with this, X number of billions of dollars of revenue we have? Should we hire one person to just, all you have to do is be at work, look at the news on Facebook and say, holy crap, that's totally ridiculous. Let me get rid of that one. I guess they just couldn't swing it, couldn't find the money for that one. They're moving towards automation. Everybody is, but whatever. Okay, but that's definitely true. Whether they would bring them back, I don't know. But again, that's only the tip of the iceberg. I think the bulk of the damage is probably done, although who knows whether it's the bulk of the damage. But I think so. It seems much more insidious in the darker corners of Facebook, where it's just a closed ecosystem of Trump supporters sharing garbage news with one another without it ever rising to the level of showing up in the Facebook news feed. Worse still, I think there's some indication. I don't really understand exactly. I'm not a Facebook person, so I'm not real familiar with the way things work, and I'm certainly not familiar with the advanced functions. But if I recall correctly, I'm going to have to do some more reading on this, but if I recall correctly, between these stories about the sharing of fake news and the stories, for instance, about the odd ways in which you could target advertising, which I think they went back and unplugged as soon as they realized how this was being used. But I think they were providing tools for very specific targeting of advertising, and I think they were including demographic information, the idea of which originally, I believe, was to say, okay, well, if I want to, just like legitimate advertising, if I have a product that I want to target to one demographic group or another, even if it's racially based, there are ways of doing it which are at least considered to be largely legitimate ways of dealing with it. If I want to advertise a product that I think will be either exceptionally popular in the African American community or isn't popular enough in the African American community and I want to reach them or whatever, an event, a product, a service, what have you, there's demographic breakdowns for the broadcast radio and television stations out there, and you can say, all right, this is where the African American community in general, according to statistics, is more likely to spend their time viewing or listening. That's where I'm going to advertise. Right? Sensible enough. But how do you do that with Facebook? Or how much more detailed can you get with Facebook? And the fact that it's computerized and you can actually program it to reach pretty much exactly who you want to reach. You can make these choices, but you can also make these choices in the negative. Like, for instance, the stories we heard in the closing days of the election about people from, like, Trump campaign, Trump supporters, targeting advertising either specifically by race so that, the most racist content could reach our most virulent racists but never show up in the Facebook feed, almost no matter what, I guess, of somebody who was identifiable to the algorithms as African American, so that you could basically have dark, hidden racism out there being distributed among channels calculated to avoid detection for as long as possible. That was very troubling, and it made the news. And I think that somewhere in the middle there, between the fake news propagation and the targeting, I think there's also the possibility that an enormous amount of the fake news circulates in similar ways that will be difficult for Facebook to detect without drilling down past the comfortable level of respecting people's privacy, which is also, I guess, the other bookend in this problematic formula. Okay, so definitely a lot of interesting material to mine there. Better minds than mine with respect to this stuff, for sure, are mining it now and fighting about it as well. And at some level it will have to be fought over how much do we want Facebook patrolling these things? How intrusive do we want them to be in patrolling it with a good end in mind, making sure that people get verifiably decent, at least, news? How much drilling down into people's profiles do we want them to do? I don't know. That's a difficult question. There's more to it, of course, and I had a note for myself along the side here, but I never actually made it to the pencil to write it down. So instead, I'll go with your thoughts about these things. A couple of people chiming in on them. Let's see. We have... Got to scroll back a little bit today. It's a very busy day in the response columns. Let's see. Karen D, you know who you... if you're not following yet, you can. Karesf, saying exactly what I've heard from African-American coworkers. It will be symbolically renamed Trump Care. We're back to the Obamacare. Symbolically renamed Trump Care, and the right will be happy. I think so. It's occurred to an awful lot of people, and it's independently unless we have an enormous... That's it. We just have the largest African-American audience in the world for this show, and they heard it from us. I think it's occurred to a lot of people that all you got to do is rename it, especially if you're trying to design something from the ground up and you're an empty-headed moron, then that's likely what you're going to do. I mean, what did Melania Trump needed a speech? And I don't know if she's an empty-headed moron, but it's a big job, and it was assigned to empty-headed morons to do for her. Get her a speech. So they just took Michelle Obama's speech. For the most part, when they need to formulate policy, they have cribbed it. And so they will do the same, no doubt, for something as complex as Obamacare. Parleo has a comment on the Facebook issue. Facebook, and this is beautifully English, the way this is put. Facebook have withdrawn targeting by race. That's great construction. I love that. That's very British. We, of course, would say, I'm sure incorrectly to your ears, Facebook has withdrawn. We think of it as one single entity, whereas you are expressing it as an organization. I love the way that happens when we're talking about sports and teams, and you refer to them as to team units as plural too, which is also correct. I enjoy that. Facebook have withdrawn targeting by race only for certain sectors, though: housing, employment, and the extension of credit. Those are the ones that we regulate here, and so with good reason they started with those. They may never get around to the rest of it, so you can still do it for political purposes, I guess. Good point. Brucey Roche. Let's see, what's this? I see some fake Dem news too. It's very destructive. There's no doubt. Distracting, sows confusion, sends people heading in unproductive directions. That's absolutely true. Of course, I guess for both sides, we would have to, or want to, differentiate between that's a bad spin on real news and that's something that you thought was true but wasn't, or you misunderstood or misread something, versus I want to make up a fake story that will make people's blood boil and I will start from whole cloth. I guess it doesn't really matter, but it's one of the gray areas and one of the bits of nuance to a problem like this. For instance, I guess the aspect of the question: what do you do with a person who's habitually distributing this? Do you ban them after some certain number of instances? That's a one-off question, but might you treat it differently if there was somebody who was just prone to misreading situations or hyperbolic expressions of their own view of what a story means, versus Denzel Washington stories? I just made it up. I grabbed a picture of a celebrity and said This guy says he's going to assassinate Obama, whatever it is. I mean, obviously you would want to treat that differently. How do you write it into an algorithm or even a set of rules for humans to follow? I'm not sure. At this stage, at the opening stages of this game, I would say it's the old Supreme Court pornography test. I know when I see it, that's going to get you in trouble. But let me talk about that for just a second. Getting yourself in trouble as Facebook. Obviously, they're going to want to be careful and want to do this as objectively as possible. But it's a subjective game at some levels. So they're going to get in trouble. What does it matter, I guess, is my question. The fear of backlash from the right. And I've got some articles, and so maybe it's time to turn to Pocket and do this more coherently by leaning on the thoughts that others have actually spent time collating at some point. But the fear of backlash from the right. You are doing this to target right-wing or right-leaning users and to make it impossible for them to share the information that they enjoy, whatever. I mean, there's all sorts of spins to put on it, but I guess, here I need to do some screenshots while I'm working on something else, so you'll excuse the camera flashing noises in the background, I hope. But you're probably going to be disproportionately, at least to some extent, targeting right-leaning sites, but that's because, of course, your data tells you that more of the right-leaning sites are responsible for sharing more of the goofy, incorrect news. I mean, it's happening. That's just the reality. I can't remember exactly where we saw it cited the other day, but I thought in my mind it was the figure of 38%, wasn't it? They were 38% more likely. Fake news was 38% more likely to be once it was circulating. It was 30. I guess if I remember the way they expressed, 38% more likely to be on right-wing sites, or that 38% more of their content tended to be fake. I can't recall exactly how they expressed the statistic, but it was clear that they had found that a preponderance of the fake news was being circulated among the right wing, and so it was gonna certainly feel like they were being targeted, but because they also feel like everything in the world is unfair, they would be grousing and complaining and trying to work the ref so that to get Facebook to back off from that. And I am I guess I want to throw out this proposal that you should consider it this way: who cares? There's nothing for you to worry about. I want to bring up the example of the last time that conservatives became convinced that Facebook specifically was being unfair to them and had a left-wing bias, which will strike you as an awfully familiar story because they think everything has a left-wing bias. They think reality has, I mean, that's the joke, that reality has a well-known left-wing bias. They think everything does. But like, as with Facebook and so many other things, they have very often announced that they were angry over it and that they were going to storm off en masse and start their own alternative. So how many of you are covering yourselves belt and suspenders because you want to get all the news and all the perspectives? You're also on Reagan Book, right? Do you remember how stupid that was? The idea, first of all, the name was ridiculous, but I mean, the idea, they've tried this. They've said before, it's been years since they did it the last time. Facebook is unfairly biased against conservatives. We're going to start our own Reagan Book. We're doing it. Well, that didn't work. So how much have they got to fear? Might it organize itself better now that if it were organizing under the umbrella of a successful, quote unquote, successful presidential campaign, I suppose there's a bigger risk. I mean, with a platform like that, it's possible that you really could move users, but I don't know. People are pretty sluggish and lethargic, and Trump supporters perhaps more so than anyone else. It would be awfully difficult, but I guess it's certainly possible to worry about. But I mean, if you got your studies and you got your data, I don't know. And would it be the worst thing in the world if the most deplorable people in the world decided that they were going to do their sharing elsewhere? I don't know. I'm not 100% sure that that's such a bad thing. But it being a bottom line question for Mark Zuckerberg, that whatever. How am I going to convince a guy who's making money hand over fist to just make it hand and forget the over fist? How would you modify that metaphor? I don't know. Let's see. Sponson points out study of fake news on Facebook did show, there's the number. 38% was right wing, 16% left. Okay, so I've misinformed you. I said that the right was 38% more likely or something to share fake news than the left, but rather it is fake news on Facebook in totality, if I understand this correctly, 38% or so of all the fake news was identifiable as right-wing biased, whereas 16% of the fake news was identifiable as left biased. I mean, that's not a great showing. You want it to be zero for both, but you want it to be zero for the left. But is it statistically wrong then to say that that more than double the percentage? I guess that's not statistically wrong to say. It wouldn't necessarily be. Could you extrapolate then from that the right wing was twice as likely? Not really, I guess, but twice the volume of fake news. All right. Well, okay. But if you do the study and you have the numbers and you decide you're going to pull the trigger, I don't know. All I'm saying is there's not a tremendous amount, I don't think, to be afraid of from the threat that they're going to walk. I don't think they're going anywhere. People are invested in their Facebook accounts. I don't know. But I guess that's their job and it's their business and they have to figure it out for themselves. I do have a couple of, as I said, more fully discussed, more fully developed arguments that we can share about it. Let's see. And Google is jumping into this fight too, with, I think, maybe an even a better targeting mechanism than trying to figure out what's fake and what's not. New York Times has this story. We'll use up one of our clicks for the month on this one. Let's see. Google and Facebook take aim at fake news sites. This by Nick Wingfield, Mike Isaac, and Katie Benner in the New York Times. Here's the Times version of it. There was also an article. Let me just peek back to see where. Oh, the Wall Street Journal likewise took the story on Google to bar fake news websites. I don't want to give it away. If it's not in the New York Times version, the headline will kill it all. But let's see. Over the last week, two of the world's biggest internet companies have faced mounting criticism over how fake news on their sites may have influenced the presidential election's outcome. On Monday, those companies responded by making it clear that they would not tolerate such misinformation by taking pointed aim at fake news sites' revenue sources. That's a great place to start, at least. Fake news sharing is deplorable. Fake news sharing for profit seems to me to be that much more deplorable, particularly purely for profit. I mean, somehow it's even more annoying. The Macedonian teenagers, maybe it's because they're foreign, I don't know, but I would be, I think, just as annoyed at American teenagers who don't give a damn who the president is either way. Just saying, I'm going to do this for the cash, but I don't know. Is it worse that Macedonians are doing it? We'll leave that question aside for the moment. On Monday, those companies, Google and Facebook, responded by making it clear that they would not tolerate such misinformation by taking pointed aim at fake news sites' revenue sources. Google kicked off the action on Monday afternoon when the Silicon Valley search giant said, in case you didn't know who Google was, it would ban websites that peddle fake news from using its online advertising service. There's the long story short, the headline at Wall Street Journal says, Google to bar fake news websites from using its ad-selling software, AdSense. That's where the Macedonians are making their money. It's not, there's no cash payment that I know of, let's say, coming from the Trump campaign or the RNC or the Koch brothers or anybody that I know of. No cash payment for writing fake news stories. Again, that I know of. But the model, at least for the Macedonians, was you write fake news stories, you put them on Facebook, you share them on Facebook, you link them through Facebook to your web page. People see them on Facebook and say, oh my God, what a killer headline. I got to read this story. They click out of Facebook over to your website, which is chock full of Google AdSense ads. And hopefully you read the story, you generate traffic for the site. Hopefully then you click on some of the ads on, hopefully you don't, but they want you to click on the ads on their site and they make money that way. The fake news is just a way of luring you reliably to sites that are packed with money-making ads. But if news sites that traffic primarily in fake news were no longer allowed to use Google AdSense, the easiest and most lucrative, I guess, way of making money as an individual website owner with advertising, if that were not available to you, well, then to hell with it. Why bother with the work of flooding Facebook with fake news if I can't do it? I guess they might move into fake news about stuff that Facebook, for whatever reason, thinks doesn't matter, like, I don't know, sports, but I don't know. They might still be caught. I'm sure they'll work around it and try and find a way, and they'll find things that say, well, what's attractive to Americans to click on that doesn't rise to the level of absolute outright falsehood. They'll just find a gray area. But as long as it's not politics, that would be, I think, a step in the right direction. So what did they say here? Google says no more use of their online advertising service if you're a fake news website. Hours later, Facebook updated the language in its Facebook Audience Network policy, which already says it will not display ads in sites that show misleading or illegal content, to include fake news sites. We have updated the policy to explicitly clarify that this applies to fake news, a Facebook spokesman said in a statement. Our team will continue to closely vet all prospective publishers and monitor existing ones to ensure compliance. Taken together, the decisions were a clear signal that the tech behemoths could no longer ignore the growing outcry over their power in distributing information to the American electorate. I don't see how you could deny it. I mean, you can try. Zuckerberg did. But Google would have a hell of a lot harder time denying its power in distributing information to the American electorate when you have candidates for president saying in debates, nationally televised debates, Google this thing and you'll find out. I mean, everybody knows that phrase. Okay. Facebook has been at the epicenter of the debate, accused by some commentators of swinging some voters in favor of Trump through misleading and outright wrong stories that spread quickly via the social network. One such false story claimed that Pope Francis had endorsed Mr. Trump. Google did not escape the glare, with critics saying the company gave too much prominence to false news stories. On Sunday, the site Mediaite reported that the top result on a Google search for final election vote count 2016 was a link to a story on a website called 70 News that wrongly stated that Mr. Trump, who won the Electoral College, was ahead of his Democratic challenger, helpfully it's Hillary Clinton, they tell us, in the popular vote. Yes, they've been telling one another that they won the popular vote for the last couple of days. I think it sprung from a misreading of the projections about the vote in the way that CNN was displaying it on its site. But yeah, that's something they've been sharing for a long time, or a week. and yeah, but now that's a good question. If it's if it was simply I think, understandable misreading of the way CNN was displaying its data, is that fake news? Is that somebody that should get dinged for making up news or not? Don't listen to me. By all means, eliminate 70 News from your circulation. But I guess if you're taking it to court, you're going to get that argument made. All right, let's see. How much more? Is there anything else that's worth mining out of this New York Times bit? I don't really think so. I guess there's some facts and figures about just how far their Facebook and Google really reach. But let's see here. By Monday evening, that fake story about the popular vote count had fallen to number 2 in a search for those terms. Google says software algorithms that use hundreds of factors determine the ranking of news stories. Yeah, that's always been a controversial thing. Just how do they figure this stuff out and rank their stories? Okay, let's see. So I think that probably will wrap it for the Facebook discussion. We don't really need the Wall Street Journal version of it. But you know what? I guess here's a possible interesting segue. We discussed this the other day. I'm going to move from Facebook itself to some of the ways that Facebook and online social media tools are used for organizing. The other day, Greg brought to our attention the tweet storm by a woman who, you'll probably want to follow along. I'll give you the Twitter handle. You remember Siyanda Writes? It's Siyanda, Siyanda Writes. It's Siyanda Mohutsua, is my best guess at the pronunciation of her name. But if you're actually looking for her on Twitter, so that you can learn to pronounce it yourself, Siyanda Writes, Writes, and she was the one whose tweet storm began with, if people followed the alt-right groups on Reddit, they would know that young white Americans were told to hide their support of Trump. Do you remember this one? The main thrust that I recall of the tweet storm, though, was slightly different, and it begins in the next tweet. These college-educated young men were then ripe enough to be sold the idea that Trump represented a return to men being real men. Remember this? What I've surmised so far is a genuine belief in a return to an ideal America before feminists and minorities destroyed the dream, and that this really had a basis in the weird overlap of Gamergate, men's rights advocacy, so-called men's rights advocacy, and weirdly, the pickup artist circles. I mean, that's really grim and gross to even have to acknowledge that there is such a thing. But it has been brought to my attention in the past, and she hits on something very real. And it turns out that it's been written on in the last couple of days in The Guardian as well. But you remember what they were talking about here. She goes on to say, Siyanda does, when we talk about online radicalization, we always talk about Muslims, but the radicalization of white men online is at astronomical levels. I know we discussed it, but I want to remind you. One reason why places like Twitter and Facebook made us think Hillary Clinton would win is because Trump supporters were told to be quiet lest they be, quote, persecuted. Right? Many of these radical white men were raised by single feminist mothers. This will ring a bell from the other day. Internet groups radicalized their sexual frustration into bigotry. She's, I think, skipping a lot of steps in this, but it's right thinking. I think once we get all through her tweets, it'll be woven together a little bit more. And then I'll share this Guardian piece that I think will fill in any remaining blanks. These online groups found young white men at their most vulnerable and convinced them liberals were colluding to destroy white Western manhood. Let's see. Oh, I gotta keep scrolling down here. It's let me look back in Skype and see whether would have been like Thursday or Friday when Greg shared this thing. Did he have it tweet stormed somewhere or storified somewhere? I should have asked him before he even left for the day, because reading the thread is actually pretty difficult to do with the number of responses that she had interspersed in there. Let's see. So let's see. He wasn't here on Friday. I don't see it from Thursday. Just this might make things move a little more quickly and a little more smoothly, but I don't know. Now I can't come up with it offhand, but I feel certain that it was done. Too bad. Okay. One more quick run through here. No, I just can't put my finger on it. So, okay, back to Twitter, and we'll deal with it that way instead. Okay, slowly but surely we'll make our way through this. Too many windows open. Here we go. All right, so where do we leave off from Sionda? Not all of these young white men, by the way, are stupid, which he puts in bunny ear quotes. Men who boasted STEM degrees from elite institutions were taught how to intellectualize hatred. I've wanted to write about this for years, even pitched it to Salon, but everyone who writes about alt-right groups is viciously attacked. Yes, that's obviously true too. All right, so let's open this up a little bit more. I've seen this happen with a Facebook friend who lives in a tiny 100% white town in Finland. He started posting about flawed multiculturalism. How could a guy who goes months without seeing people of color be so adamant about the failings of multiculturalism? Online radicalization. That's the answer. Remember this? I mean, this does ring a bell. Greg went through all of this. I just feel like it needs to be said again. They are told that feminism is why they can't get girlfriends, that feminization of schools is why they didn't do well in high school. This is important. Young men came to these online groups for tips on picking up girls and came out believing that it was up to them to save Western civilization. Again, why do I think this is important? I want to drop this again. Have this in mind as we read through this. If you still thought I was kidding or just trying to spread some kind of weird, nasty rumor at the time, I said earlier on in the cycle that the weird overlap, the strange symbiotic relationship between the alt-right and Trump world was that they were both essentially sex cults, and it sounds like maybe I was overstating the case, but just read this with that in mind. Okay, so back to the tweet storm. Just because folks weren't yelling their support of Trump off the rooftops didn't mean they didn't have it. They were told to hide it. Why did we skip back down to this? I've been following these online alt-right groups for 3 years and watched them evolve from pickup artist forums, PUA forums, to hate-fueled organizations. All right. And here, again, this is where it becomes easier. If for some reason, if at any point you resisted plugging in the misogyny accusation into Trump world and the alt-right, or you just said, well, I understand that they're bitter about things, but or that their chief adversaries may even be women, or that they're taught that feminism is the problem, and so therefore it stands to reason that their chief opponents will be women because they're the chief proponents of feminism, though there are certainly, obviously, thank God, feminist ally men out there to do this too. But okay. There were certainly people who thought, well, okay, it's not that they actively hate women per se, that meaning, real misogyny. It's that, they're inept at dealing with anybody socially, and particularly it's problematic with women. Plus, they hate feminism for some reason. They were just sort of told it was terrible. And so they are rude to women in general, anybody that they perceive to be feminist. But I guess there's just more to it. Continuing again with Sianda's writing, many young men are told to keep their anti-POC, people of color, sexist views from their, quote, libtard family and friends. Remember this? Hence, this surprise from the mainstream. Okay, so let's continue on. And all of these tweets, because I don't have them in Storify, are interspersed with people's responses. So I actually have to kind of pick through and find what's hers and what's not. There are even entire posts training young men to parrot libtard ideology, to say the right thing, to keep safe in hostile PC spaces, as they put it. And you can see here the overlap with the PUA pickup artist origins. I mean, what is PUA technique other than teaching people who are socially inept, particularly with women, things to say, giving them a script that makes it sound like they're an evolved, actually sensitive human being so that they can hook up with women and then abandon them afterwards. I mean, that's essentially what they're after in these spaces for various reasons, and there are various reasons for it. I mean, yes, there are certainly some people who read, I guess, these PUA forums with the idea in mind is, I want to get a girlfriend. I want to have a relationship with somebody, although it's going to be awfully difficult to maintain a real, meaningful relationship that's based on garbage, but what do they care? But then there's also a very strong sector, which we'll get into our next article from The Guardian and explain it, of people who have no intention or no interest whatsoever in having a relationship. They want no contact with women at all beyond the sex that they get out of following the instructions. So it makes sense. It's actually something to carry over. You pretend with women in order to get what you want out of them. I need you to pretend with libtards as well, is basically the thrust of it here. Let's see how much more we have from Sianda in this thread. This is an extraordinarily long thread, because as you can imagine, lots of people had lots to say in response, some of which was supportive and other of which was, of course, attacks. Let's see, is there more to it, or should we... I'm scrolling further and further to find more of Sianda's own tweets in this thread. It's now become chiefly responses. I guess at this point, it might be a good idea then to skip over to a more coherent expression of all this than we're able to wean from a tangled tweet thread like this. Where have I put this thing? That's the next question. Here we are. The Guardian's piece. And what do you know if it isn't illustrated with a photo of Steve Bannon? Good golly, how did that happen? We need to talk, she says. This is Abby Wilkinson, ABI, Abby Wilkinson, if you want to find her online. Not to yell at her, please go to support her. We need to talk about the online radicalization, with an S, of young white men. With the appointment of Breitbart News' chair to Trump's staff, we need to be clear about the links between misogyny, racism, and neo-fascism on alt-right websites. That's pretty succinct. Let's go, Abby. Tell us about it. For several years now, I've had a dark and fairly unusual hobby. Me too. Mine's gunfail. What's yours? When I'm alone and bored and in the mood, and the mood strikes me, I'll open up my laptop and head for a particularly unsavory corner of the internet. P.S. Let me just make sure of the date on this thing here. Yeah, okay. It's current. It's November 15th. It's today. And Armando is calling. Let's interrupt just for a second. Hey, Armando. Armando?
Hello?
Hi.
Hey, David, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, sorry about that.
You're sorry I can hear you? Me too.
No, sorry that I was having a little
yeah, no, that's fine.
confusion on that point. It's a nasty day in New York, so.
Okay, what's going on?
Well, I just wanted to give you what I think might be a word of the day. That word is emolument.
Oh, that's a good one.
Emolument.
Are you going to give me an emolument?
I am not going to give you an emolument. And the reason I bring the word up to you is because tucked inside the Constitution is a prohibition on any government officer receiving an emolument from a foreign nation.
Yes. Foreign nation. Yeah, that too. Okay.
Right.
Money. Remuneration or reward of any kind.
Well, it doesn't mean money necessarily. It means compensation, I suppose. It could mean a lot of things. The dictionary definition is fairly broad.
Sure. A giant hotel in Moscow, for instance.
A giant hotel in Moscow, a zoning variance, a tax abatement.
A private online bank account that contacts you at Trump Tower regularly. Whatever.
Yeah. Waiving bank fees, if you will, or providing favorable interest rates for your business loan.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things, I believe, would be called emoluments. I think that's a fair reading of the constitutional provision. I don't have the provision in front of me, but I believe it's in Article 1, and it's fairly straightforward. It's interesting because it's also anachronistic because it bans honorifics and titles. You couldn't accept a dukedom, so to speak, from Moldavia or whatever. But I think for our current purposes, I think the compensation payment, financial favorable provisions would probably qualify. The reason I raise it won't surprise you. Donald Trump has foreign investments.
Yeah, and he loves emoluments.
And he likes emoluments, and in fact, he self-emoluments himself a lot with his foundation.
Might have to bleep that. Okay.
But I raise it for two issues. Number one, I think there is indeed a constitutional issue here with Donald Trump. Is there a situation that should be explored? Number two, I guess the question is, I haven't done the research, but I doubt there's any enabling legislation that allows for enforcement of this. I think by its nature, then it becomes a political question. We always talk about if the president does it, it's legal. And I'm not sure that is correct, but practically speaking, it's not something that's going to be stopped by legal means, unless somebody talks about it. I also think it puts a real problem with the question of blind trusts, because an emolument, a payment, doesn't require you to seek it or even know about it. If you're getting it, it seems to me it's a problem. I think that there's a real issue there if you care about the Constitution's provisions. And I will be the first to admit I don't care about all of them. But this one seems to be one that should have some care to it, some concern. The reason, of course, is you don't want foreign nations to bribe your president in this case.
Right.
Here we have a president whose financial and foreign financial entanglements are numerous, and emoluments seems to be a real issue to consider. I don't think we've had this in our recent history. I don't know if other presidents might have had something along those lines. Of course, they have these registries for government officials. I mean, it does where they have to report the gifts that they receive, and in fact, they can't receive them for the most part.
Yeah, and I think that policy grows right from this section. It's Article 1, Section 9, by the way, the last clause of Section 9.
Right, and I would just wonder, and I just set the table, and I'll promise if you want, I'll do some research and try to bring you some information more to see what legislation exists on this, because I do believe the ban on foreign gifts is something that's in legislation.
I'm sure.
And it'll be interesting to see if it can be considered applicable here to the president-elect. And what might have to be done about it. I mean, if there is some enforcement mechanism, it's not going to be by private right. So you're going to need I would assume a Justice Department or some branch of the government to invoke some type of enforcement power and look for a remedy.
Yeah.
The remedy might be divestment.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, there's a number of possibilities, but yeah, that's something we're going to have to research and disseminate the findings, because it's more likely than ever before to become an issue, and it might be a gray area. It might need to. I mean, surely he'll be fighting tooth and nail for any emolument he can get, and just insisting that it doesn't. It either isn't one, or he didn't know about it and so therefore it shouldn't count, or he's a unique situation, or it really belongs to his kids and not him. But, none of that would fly for Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, or anyone else, because it's not supposed to. So, yeah, we should do that. We should look into it. We should make a show of it and a continuing theme of it.
Yeah, at the very least, I do want to. I just wanted to point out to you, and I promise I'll take an hour or two this evening and see what I can come up with and report back to you tomorrow. I just wanted to raise it today because I do think it's worth exploring.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it, and I do want to take it up, and I also do need to. I'll at this point jump back. I'm getting
no.
tweets.
I actually have one thought on that other
article.
thing about fake news. I do think it's not quite as unusual a situation as some would paint it to be. There's been fake news for a while.
Yeah.
It's a question of how you want to handle it. I mean, Facebook is not a government entity. It can do anything it wants. It can say that if you post 3 fake news pieces, your account is suspended for a week or a month or forever.
Yeah.
I mean, they do that now with things that they don't like. I'm not a Facebook user.
I think they should have a judiciary branch, a judicial branch of Facebook. I'll be a Facebook judge.
Exactly.
You ask
have
me
an
if this is...
an adversarial process to see if you should be suspended or not.
Sure.
But the reason I think it's not unusual, I mean, I think that it's something that Daily Kos dealt with over the years.
True.
It's very famous controversy over conspiracy theories.
Mm-hmm. And we've done them right and we've done them wrong. So.
Well, we sure have, but we certainly struggled with the issue, and we thought it through and saw the posting and the dissemination of fake or false information at Daily Kos as a problem that we needed to address. Whether we did it right or wrong, we didn't say it doesn't matter, which I believe was Facebook's initial reaction. I think they've since recalibrated.
And they could not have caused it or had no role in it. But, yeah, I mean, this isn't an attack on Mark Zuckerberg, or shouldn't evolve into one. I think it was an extraordinarily difficult thing that they'd have to deal with. And, he invented this thing for people to talk to one another. And then all of a sudden somebody says, by the way, you're the most powerful dissemination of information platform the world has ever seen. So you need to govern it accordingly.
Yeah, I will say, though, that they were certainly not shy or against that characterization when it was favorable to them. Now, when there's a bit of a controversy, to pretend that we don't have anything to do with that is it's a little disingenuous. I understand that your first reaction is to push back against blame. We all do that, but let's see what the second chapter brings for how they plan to handle it, and I'll eagerly listen to the rest of your show to see what your thoughts are.
Okay, well, I'm going to put those aside, actually, and continue with this other very interesting article, which I think you'll enjoy. But I think basically Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we'll be back on this and talking more about fake news, Facebook's reaction, how to deal with it, what we've done in the past at Daily Kos, what's likely to be done, and how they're likely to evade the controls in the future. There's a great profit motive for doing it. They'll find a way. But
absolutely.
Thanks very much.
I'll be listening.
Okay. All right. I'm going to jump back now at this point then to the Guardian's article from Abby Wilkinson, which I think is extraordinarily important. I'm not. It doesn't look like it's all that long either, so hopefully we'll be able to make it all the way through here. We still got the time. All right. So where were we? She was describing her dark and unusual hobby that she follows along one of the more unsavory corners of the internet. No, not the bit you're thinking of. Somewhere far worse. And I guess you were thinking of porn, admit it. But this is worse. That loose network of blogs, forums, subreddits, and alternative media publications colloquially known as the manosphere. Now, that's actually got an entry in Wikipedia in case you care to look up what is the manosphere. It's an online subculture, the article continues, centered around hatred, anger, and resentment of feminism, specifically, and women more broadly. It's grimly fascinating and now troublingly relevant. In modern parlance, this is the part of the phenomenon known as the alt-right. So this is breaking out from the article here, a slightly more specific view of the alt-right. Broadly speaking, it seems to me the unifying part, the unifying core of the alt-right is being shocking and engendering dismay in your opponents. So that I guess it's possible, although I doubt very much, that there's a large number of them, or for alt-right people to be, dedicated neo-Nazis, but, not particularly disturbed by feminism. But I doubt it. There's an awful lot of overlap here. And so, but misogyny isn't, it's not just the things that you do are terrible to women and for women. It's the genuine article here that women are inherently the problem, not feminism necessarily, although that begins with it because it pushes back on misogyny, but that women are the problem, that their involvement in anything is problematic and you must cut it out. It's really out there. In modern parlance, as she said, this is the phenomenon known as the alt-right. More sympathetic commentators portray it as a backlash to PC culture. That's a handy backdoor into misogyny. That's a bad thing. Well, it's not that. I'm just pushing back on PC culture. And even the liberal, if you think he is liberal, Bill Maher, the comedian, he hates PC, so it must be something to it, right? The more sympathetic commentators portray it as a backlash to PC culture, and critics call it out as neo-fascism. Over the past year, it has been strange to see the disturbing internet subculture I've followed for so long enter the mainstream. And you might as well say enter the White House, too. And just to back it up a little bit here, my mind flashed when she wrote, critics call it out as neo-fascism. Likely many of you saw the abhorrent headlines the other day of with Steve Bannon's appointment to his new job in the White House. The news organizations could only bring themselves to say that critics say he's got a record of, neo-fascism, racism, and misogyny, or that he who critics see him as racist, not because he is racist. I mean, that's why we see him as racist, but they can't bring themselves to say that. That's conclusory to them. But remember that there are mainstream journalists and prominent ones who believe that saying someone is racist is a racist thing to say. You remember when Elizabeth Warren was being interviewed at I don't remember whether it was the Democratic convention or whether she was being interviewed in the periphery of the Republican convention, but one of ABC News' top guys, right, asked her, Donald Trump calls you Pocahontas, is that racist? And she says, yeah, of course it's racist. And his witty rejoinder is, but isn't that calling him a name though? That was his response, that calling someone a racist is just name calling and therefore just as bad as being racist, which calling somebody a name, I guess, depending on the name, is not the same thing as racism, not necessarily as bad as racism. Like, you're dumb. Is that as bad as, Pocahontas? I guess if you say the name that you call somebody is the N-word, then you say, well, okay, that's just outright racism. But I remember being astonished that guy, well, isn't that calling him a name? Isn't that name calling? Isn't that just as bad? No, he's a racist. What am I going to do? If he's got green hair, but aren't you calling him a name? Well, only in the sense that, the bulk of us who aren't colorblind will see a certain color of a certain, portion of the visible light spectrum reflected from his hair, and that'll be right in the green band. And I mean, what are you talking about? Is that calling him a name? He is racist. He just called me a racist name. What do you want me to say? But aren't you calling him a name now too? No, I'm telling you what he just did. I can't believe you can't intellectually separate those things. Doesn't matter. Okay, back to The Guardian. This is the important thing, right? I just wanted to point that out, that I know that you probably were waiting for me to bring up that framing, that article, that headline, that Bannon is only seen by critics as racist or fascist or what have you. Anyway, over the past year, it's been, she says, strange to see the disturbing internet subculture I've followed for so long enter the mainstream. The executive chairman of one of its most popular media outlets, Breitbart, has just been appointed Donald Trump's chief of strategy, and their UK bureau chief was among the first Brits to have a meeting with the president-elect. Their figurehead, remember this guy, Milo Yiannopoulos, toured the country stumping for him during the campaign on his, quote, dangerous faggot tour. That's another weird subculture of the alt-right that it's so jarring and nonsensical for gay Trump supporters, one, to exist, because, I don't know, although now he says he's not anti-gay, but it's cognitive dissonance for the rest of us, and I think Milo and his ilk calculate correctly that to some extent it irritates liberals to see this happening and to say, how could someone rise to prominence in Trump world if they're flamboyantly, well, if they're gay at all and flamboyantly outly what the deplorables used to call in your face gay. This is what they were always saying they were so angry about, was that people were out and open, and here he is out and open. So how could it be that he's rising to prominence? And isn't it ridiculous? And shouldn't he see it for what it is and leave or do something different? And he's really just doing it to make you angry and annoyed. And for whatever reason, there are apparently certain gay folks that they're fine with as long as they fall in line with them. I don't know whether push will ever come to shove and they'll find themselves thrown under the bus. I don't even know that there's going to be an issue area that comes up where they really have to do that, or whether gay supporters of Trump will care. But anyway, yeah, Milo, by the way, I guess another interesting thing to point out about him is he's been banned from Twitter. So in terms of news or social media platforms deciding that there are certain people that cross the line and simply cannot be allowed to use the platform, whether it's because they use it to disseminate fake news or they use it to intimidate others or whatever, they do this from time to time. And by the way, I don't know of anybody who's ever been banned from Twitter. I'm sure that would point to this on the conservative side as liberal bias, but I don't know that there's ever been any ultra-liberal people who were just banned from Twitter the way Chuck Johnson, the redheaded one, and Milo have been. But anyway, so going back to the story once again, I apologize for interrupting them, but we'll get the story out. It's so fascinating. She makes so many great points packed into this small space that I feel like I want to comment on every one of them. So, where were we? Breitbart's UK bureau chief, among the first Brits to meet with the president-elect. Their figurehead, Milo, toured the country stumping for him during the campaign on his dangerous faggot tour. These people are now part of the political landscape. On their forums, I've read long, furious manifestos claiming that women are all sluts who, and I have to do some editing here, you'll have to read this for yourself, but ride the, how do I even deal with this? It's the C word, the male C word, ride the carousel. That's very funny. So they're all women are sluts who ride the C word carousel and sleep with a series of alpha males. Only the alpha males, of course. Why would they? Until they reach the end of their sexual prime, at which point they seek out a beta cuck to settle down with for financial security. Why do they settle down with beta cucks for financial security? Because if you're an alpha male and you still want to have sex with that woman, you can. It's okay, because that guy's just a beta cuck. And she's only with him for the financial security anyway. If she were still, affable, she'd be with an alpha male still. And I can, if I still think she's got it, I can ride in there and take it. One, because I'm a man and she's a woman, and two, because I'm an alpha and he's a beta. Okay, great rules. I've lurked silently on blogs dedicated to pick-up artistry, as men argue that uppity, opinionated feminist women like myself, need to be put in their place through corrective rape. You thought I was kidding about sex cults. I know about the men going their own way movement, which I've seen abbreviated recently. That's one of their little hashtags, MGTOW, men going their own way. What does that mean? It's based around the idea that men should avoid any sort of romantic or sexual relationship with women. I'm aware of traditional marriage advocates who often argue that you should aim to marry a very young woman, as she's likely easier to control. I also learned the difference between an incel, I-N-C-E-L, who is involuntarily celibate, and a volcel, who makes a deliberate choice to avoid sexual activity, and sometimes also masturbation, often in the belief that ejaculation depletes their testosterone and saps them of masculine power. Now we're talking about vital, bodily fluids at this point. It's hard to know whether pseudonymous online posters are telling the truth about their offline identity. The individuals making up the manosphere seem to skew younger on average, but be drawn from all walks of life. There are socially awkward, video game-loving teenagers, bitter divorcees, and Ivy League-educated millennials who feel women don't afford them the respect and admiration they deserve, like the guy who shot up Santa Barbara, right? Or do I remember? I can't even remember what town it was now. But yeah, the guy who shot up the California college campus was all about this. That's where many of us first became exposed to this nonsense. There are men who claim to be highly successful at attracting sexual partners, but hate women all the same. Yeah, it's just this is a sort of a hierarchy that Abby was describing in her tweets about this piece. That there's the foot soldiers of it. The most numerous is the frustrated teenage video game guys who can't get a girlfriend. They can't get a girlfriend because, they're only 16 and sometimes it takes a while to develop social skills and whatnot. But of course that's a forever thing to them. Oh my gosh, it'll never work. And then in the middle, there are men who either haven't found somebody that they want to have a long-term relationship with, and if they're the mild version of this, or people who are in their 40s and have been through particularly bitter breakups or divorces and are extrapolating their feelings about that to all women. And then there are like male guys who think of themselves as sexual super predators, to bring up a particularly painful term, who are serial philanderers and do it on purpose and have no intention whatsoever of having a relationship. Maybe they even put themselves somewhere on the trajectory of these men going their own way, guys. The only contact I have with women is for sex, and I toss them out immediately following. That's the only thing they're good for, and that's what I'm going to do. And the less contact with women, the more manly and therefore alpha and therefore successful I'm going to be. I can start my own Trump University, for God's sake. There really is overlap. I mean, to me, in this thing, I mean, Trump keeps saying, I love women, when he loves to be around women that he can either have sex with or think about having sex with. That's what makes his day. So, he's not isolating himself, but he's clearly not somebody who thinks, there's this whole other half of humanity that can do other things and think other thoughts, but he places value only on one portion of it. Anyway, we'll continue with the actual collected thoughts here from Abby. It's hard to know, of course, whether or not people are telling their truth about who they are, but this is how she sees the community made up. The teenagers, the bitter divorcees, and Ivy League educated millennials who feel they're not getting the respect they deserve. There are men who claim to be highly successful at attracting sexual partners but hate women all the same. One thing I noticed early on is that the community seems to be largely white. And that's evident because race comes up a lot. Sometimes in the form of a kind of racial pseudoscience that advocates use to explain the dynamics of heterosexual relations. I got it all figured out, everybody. The age-old racist argument that black men are, quote, taking our women is made regularly. Racist slurs are chucked around casually, I think, again, in part because of the alt-right directive to be as brusque and abrasive and shockingly antisocial as possible. That's a bragging point for them. There seems to be a significant overlap with organized white supremacy. What? Who would ever have guessed that? Even taking into account its rising prominence, it would be absurd to claim that the alt-right is primarily responsible for electing Donald Trump. More than 60 million people voted for him, the majority of whom have probably had little or no contact with this strange, angry online movement. That's probably true, but I do think that if they did, they might find a niche for themselves. Some of this is garbage, but this part over here, I think this might really be... I think they share a lot of those values. More than 60 million people voted for him, the majority of whom have had probably little or no contact with this strange, angry online movement. Most were people who also voted Republican in previous elections. Yes. A minority were previous Obama voters, mainly concentrated in lower income brackets. 2/3 of white women went for the guy who was facing rape charges and who was caught on camera asserting that he would grab them by the pussy if he felt like it. Turnout was also depressed through voter suppression and because some Democratic voters felt uninspired by Hillary Clinton's candidacy. What is true, though, is that some of his most passionate core supporters seem to be regulars on the blogs and forums I'm talking about. It's no surprise that pretty much every prominent manosphere figure came out in support of Trump, and Clinton's gender isn't the only relevant factor. Prior to the election, members of the alt-right online community often warned each other to keep their Trump support secret to avoid being stigmatized by more liberal peers. Now they're celebrating openly. They're gleeful about some of the harshest policies Trump has promised, like mass deportations, defunding Planned Parenthood, the wall, etc. They feel they have scored a victory against feminism and multiculturalism. They're glad that white men are, once again, in control. They were filled with fury at the thought that they had been toppled from their rightful place at the top of the social hierarchy. This is vindication. This is why this election makes me so annoyed, of course. The old order has been defeated. This is their world now. When we fret about young people leaving Western countries and going to fight with ISIS, right? It's common to focus on the role of the internet in their political radicalization. It's time we discuss the radicalization of angry young white men in a similar way. The manosphere gave us, Here he is, Elliot Rodger. That's the guy. He was a regular in the forum PUA Hate, populated by bitter men who had tried the techniques advocated by so-called pickup artists to attract women and failed. Aha, another subsection. Reading through the posting history of various individual aliases, it's possible to chart their progress from vague dissatisfaction and desire for social status and sexual success to full-blown adherence to a cohesive ideology of white supremacy and misogyny. Neo-fascists treat these websites as recruitment grounds. They find angry, frustrated young men and groom them in their own image. Yet there's no, no prevent equivalent to try to stamp this out. And I guess here we're talking about a specific policy of the UK government. I don't think I'm familiar with it, but maybe some of you are. Much has been written about financial hardship, turning afflicted white communities into breeding grounds for white supremacist politics. But what about when dissatisfaction has little to do with economic circumstance? It's hard to know what can be done to combat this phenomenon, but surely we have to start by taking the link between online hatred and resentment of women and the rise of neo-fascism seriously. And that's absolutely true. I will point out, once again, as many of you already know, one, the stereotypical Trump supporter isn't necessarily in dire financial straits, although there are certainly plenty of them. But, yeah, good point, right? The neo-fascists are recruiting among communities devastated by economic upheaval and globalism and what have you. On the other hand, Elliot Rodger became most famous to us for filming himself riding around in a BMW. Bitter as hell that there weren't women throwing themselves in front of his BMW to have sex with him. Oh my God, a BMW? That's the sex car. Why am I not having sex with you right now? Elliot is upset that this isn't happening. I was told I could keep my stapler. I was told if I bought the BMW and put this stuff in my hair and sprayed that on my body, the sex would follow. It didn't. I'm angry. That's actually the end of the piece here. And, I wish there was more. And I know that, Abby Wilkinson, you should look for her online and on Twitter. And let me see if I can find her. I found her randomly, this morning. And there she is. Abby Wilkinson Abby is, again, ABI. Abby Wilks. ABIWILKS is our author here. Now, guess what? Here's the problem. Because she wrote about that, probably, we're now looking at a locked Twitter account. And I don't know that was the case this morning. I actually found her, as I recall, by reading a tweet from David Frum, who, we've been following along all election season, and he's been surprising, although he occasionally returns to his conservative roots, to everyone's great frustration. But I think he tweeted, because he was, yes, that's right. He tweeted out Siyanda's tweet storm earlier today saying, credit where due, here's a Twitter thread 6 days ago making all the same points as the Guardian piece to which I linked. And then I looked back, which one were you linking to? And I saw somebody having a discussion with him via Twitter saying, just commented under Abby Wilkes' must-read piece about the alt-right manosphere. And I think at that point, I may have, I don't know whether she locked this thing today or not. Wouldn't that be amazing if she was forced to lock her account today for uncovering this phenomenon in yet another widely read publication? Yeah. Good point also about the fact that you're now putting a guy in the White House who is at the very epicenter of this weird, partly hidden, dark online world. And I guess, again, just to sort of sew things up here, the accusation that I kept leveling throughout the campaign that Trump world got along well with the alt-right world because, in part, because they were both sex cults. And really what I'm talking about here is this, I think that they both draw from pools of young men who believe that there's something formulaic that they could be doing to get them, essentially to get them the sex that they want. And sometimes they think that the sex itself is power. Sometimes they think it's just an accoutrement to power. Sometimes they think it's a road to power itself. And in some cases it really can be, and in the most strange and bizarre ways. Like the story uncovered a while ago, a few months ago, and briefly discussed on the show about the strange sort of sex rings among top West Coast technology executives. That it's sort of, this is how they socialize with one another, is swapping either sexual partners or something. It's always something revolving around sex, and it's an odd thing to see. And by the way, there were some very odd explanations for what was going on in that thing. But back to the Breitbart and Trump thing. I mean, the Trump connection to the sexual component of his life is particularly obvious. I mean, he lives that out in the open. The Breitbart world alt-right version of it is slightly different, but not hidden. Certainly Milo makes no bones about hiding his activities, and his activities aren't, it's funny. It's weird that, in a way, that for all the, what do they make of it? I mean, it's hard for me to know how they figure this stuff out. And wouldn't it be interesting? I mean, I guess there really is, and it doesn't have to be surmised. It must be the case if Milo is accepted in the way he is, that somewhere in all this toxic sex stew is a mindset among young men that it doesn't matter what your orientation may be. The chief aim isn't necessarily nailing chicks. It's getting whatever sex it is you enjoy. Isn't that interesting? I mean, could you even, is it possible to point to as a silver lining? I don't think it even, I'm uncomfortable even doing that. But the idea that even among these sexually charged, super hyper, wish I was alpha young men, they're accepting of other sexual orientations. I don't know. Maybe they're really not. And that's how they're sort of intellectually justifying getting along with Milo Yiannopoulos without, what's wrong? He keeps saying things and he's a fag and I want to bash him. I'm troubled by that. Am I less manly? Maybe it's just that I like his, and all it is maybe he expresses support for your political ideology, so you don't feel like you got to beat him up. But I guess the moment he didn't, I don't know. But what an odd outcome that would be if it really was, hey, I don't care what the sexual orientation is, just so long as you nail the hell out of whatever it is you feel like nailing the hell out of, and that's the whole point. But you recall the excerpt that I once, twice probably, shared on the air with you about what it was like at the Breitbart, remember the Breitbart Embassy is what they call that weird townhouse that Steve Bannon, the new top secret cleared, they think, or they hope, chief strategist to the president-elect, that weird townhouse that he lives in, free of charge, rent-free, thanks to the generosity of some mysterious living in the shadows Egyptian politician / millionaire magnate of some kind. No one really sees fit to look into. It's not strange to you that the guy who's got the president's ear and who will want top secret clearance, etc., lives there and no one knows what the hell that's all about. But you remember the story about the party there. It was a CPAC, post-CPAC party, and the description of it was that it was so electrically sexual to this person who was describing it that an orgy could break out. You wouldn't even know. Anything could happen in this situation, and that struck me as so odd, and it strikes you as incongruous with certainly with traditional conservative values, but they don't care. That's the alt part. It's shocking to you. It will disturb you that to find out that we're so obviously forwardly sexual or gay, for that matter. Then good, we're going to say it a lot, and that's going to make you angry. And you're nowhere in polite society is it permissible to be anti-Semitic. Well, then we're going to be. And I don't even know whether they really care one way or the other. It's just aggravating and engenders anguish among people they disagree with politically, so they're just going to do anti-Semitic things. And then, of course, that would attract people who are genuinely anti-Semitic all by themselves. And then in a self-reinforcing circle, they will all eventually come out of there as genuinely anti-Semitic and genuinely misogynistic and genuinely racist and genuinely xenophobic. But yeah, I find this is a great time to bring this up. The fact that the chief architect of the news wing, the PR wing of not only Trump world and not only the alt-right, but the weird subculture of men going their own way and PUA weirdos, is all wrapped up in one, frankly, rather horrible looking package and shipped off to the White House. The White House. While he's living in the middle of this mess, by the way, I have a lot of questions about whether or not, under ordinary circumstances, this guy would ever get the clearance that he would need to work in the White House. I have no idea. But then again, what's the difference? Because you can't dispute the security clearance of the president-elect, and he lives in one too. I mean, Trump Tower, I've told you, is rife with the same kind of weirdos, plus, of course, the Russian version of it. The Russian mobster version of it is all over Trump Tower. And his pals like Stewie Rara and the others. We never even really got around to this part. There was at the beginning of the Farenthold story, here's another disparate thread in all this. At the beginning of the Farenthold story about the Trump Foundation, you remember that one of the lead-off stories in that one was how Trump went to the Charles Evans Foundation to talk him out of $150,000 over the course of 2 years, I think, which he then just turned around and gave to the Palm Beach Police Foundation as purporting that it was a gift from the Trump Foundation, as opposed to simply funneling cash from the Charles Evans Foundation. And all of that was really weird because there was the one guy whose name now escapes me, who was on the board of both the Charles Evans Foundation and the Palm Beach Police Foundation, and could simply have turned that same donation around himself very easily. But let me see if I can't quickly find the guy's name. Anyway, but so he could certainly have done the donation himself, this guy. But then looking into the people who were involved in the Charles Evans Foundation and Charles Evans himself, I wondered, like, well, what is their background? Why would he go to the Charles Evans Foundation? As it turns out, for the most part, respectable enough citizens, but weird folks just say this was where you kind of stumble into just the rich or different kind of vibe. But Charles Evans himself and this other trustee who, the more I read about the foundation, I learned that the trustees of the foundation are Charles Evans's family members, but also some of his good friends. and they all lived this sort of Manhattan upper crusty lifestyle, but they were all, rich guys, some of them, mostly new money guys. But the unifying thing about them was that they were all, at this point, old men married to much younger women, and usually for the second, third, maybe fourth time. And that, like Donald Trump, and this is, I guess, how he got to know these guys, they married basically a succession of models, younger and younger models, until they finally died. And I thought, that's a strange thing. But on the other hand, that's stereotypical, right? The old rich man who just marries a model, maybe two, maybe three of them, and we don't really think about it being an actual culture among them. It's just what old men do. And I mean, that's where we've normalized something really strange and weird. And so it does happen that we eventually normalize these things. I just thought that was really interesting. And these guys all live their lives in the same circles, in some cases in the same building, like in Trump Tower. Guys like Stewie Rara, that he's not a Russian mobster, but he lives that same sort of lifestyle and has flamboyant lifestyle, huge, splashy, ugly divorces. Remember, he circulated a sex tape to celebrate his divorce from his wife. These guys are whacked top to bottom, and Trump Tower is packed with them. And his top advisor isn't going to do him any better, because his house is packed with these wackos too, the alt-right version of them. I think this is a very weird nexus and also a very uncomfortable subject, and I think that's going to have a lot to do with the failure to stop people from normalizing it, because some of the weirdest stuff about these two overlapping, some would say concentric circles on a Venn diagram of the world, it's a disturbing topic. It's one that's not usually associated among polite society with the highest levels of government, even though I know we've been down this road before with others. And it's going to be very difficult to get them to see past that. And even if they can recognize what's going on, to get them to make the connection to why it's actually relevant to governance and policy making. What do I care what he does on his own time? After all, don't we all deserve privacy? Isn't it, after hours, who cares? Isn't that supposed to be the lesson that you liberals wanted us to learn from the Monica Lewinsky situation? Well, not really, because I guess, if to you, if sex is sex and policy is policy, fine, I guess, depending on what the hell exactly particularly you're doing. But if the way you get your sex and the kind of sex that you want has to do with your policy and the way you think of how people's rights should be distributed and recognized, gosh, well, that's actually going to, I don't know. To me, it's obvious, but not to everybody. It's going to take some convincing. For the rest of the world, I'm not sure we're ever really going to get there. That's a hell of a day. Time to wrap it up, though. We'll have more of this stuff to talk about and stories we still have not touched yet. Thankfully, we have the after show. As always, doing cleanup duty after us. It's Red Sky at Morning Tuesday. We'll cram in as much as we can in the next couple of seconds. How about that? The know-nothings may not know it, but Obama has to hold know-nothing Donald Trump's hand because the president-elect knows nothing about his new job.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Here's some good news. Do stay tuned if you were interested in what we were discussing, because the men's rights activist websites as a recruiting hub for white nationalism is a topic for discussion on today's after show. And on the last half of Visit, normally with Chris Reeves, but post-election DNC work continues to occupy his attention. They'll look elsewhere for more interesting stuff next.